Speaking Frankly podcast, where we have frank conversations with visionaries and thought leaders across the media, marketing, data, and research industries. I am Kim Frank. I am Chief Experience Officer at Motionworks and the host of this podcast. If anyone is curious who Motionworks is, we are the leader in population intelligence, and we provide past, present, and predictive insights on how the total population moves throughout the physical world, everywhere, all the time. Today, I'm going to be interviewing the infamous Gideon Adey. He is not just a friend. He is also one of the smartest people in the world when it comes to out-of-home measurement and more. He is currently acting as a measurement consultant for the World Out-of-Home Organization. He also runs a consultancy, which is pronounced Guru, G-U-R-O-O-H. I only just got that recently, despite having known the name for longer than I'd like to admit. He, in that consultancy, he leverages his expertise in analytics for buyers, sellers, industry bodies, and out-of-home ad tech companies. So I met Gideon, I think, 6 years ago while he was with Kinetic in the UK, and he was working to help DOOH, which is the nonprofit organization responsible for developing the currency in the UK for out-of-home. He was helping them to build out their currency. I consider him, as I said, to be one of the world's foremost experts on out-of-home measurement. So Gideon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for that very flattering introduction. Yes, I know a little bit about out-of-home audience metrics.
And more, I'm sure. Gideon, for those of you who do not know you, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are today?
Okay. Well, I'm an outdoor partisan. I've been in the industry 25 plus years. I started out selling for what's now Clear Channel, and also for what's now JCDecaux, and then joined a company which, over a few acquisitions, became what's now Kinetic, and spent probably 20 years odd on the buy side, moving from client service planning to, as you would describe it, geekdom in understanding audience movements and audience delivery, testing programmatic techniques kind of 5-7 years ago now, with quite a lot of hamster wheeling then. Left Kinetic a couple of years ago, and as you say, I now consult. I do a bit of work for Ipsos, who manage the data providers for the root currency here in the UK. I work for a company called Uniled, and they do independent copy trafficking or ad serving, and more importantly, verification and audience verification for digital out-of-home. They do that for 70% of the market here, and we're trialing in Australia. We do other European territories. We've got some campaigns running over there in the US as well. What else? That's probably it. Other things I do probably can't talk about.
So you sound like you're very busy. Why out-of-home? Of all the channels you could work in, of all the things you could be doing, why out-of-home?
Okay, I was trained as an engineer, textile engineering, so long chain polymers and that kind of thing. And I left university sometime in the last century, a long time ago in the last century, and there was no work. So I picked up a job, telesales, just bashing the phones, selling classified advertising in a golfing magazine. And was then approached by what was then Mills & Allen, now JCDecaux, as a sales job. And I thought, well, give it a go. And what I didn't realize, which people don't until they join out-of-home, is it's Hotel California. Once you're bitten, you're in. And so, my engineering career went out the window, and I started working in out-of-home, and probably always will.
So you can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave out-of-home. So you've spent your whole career really working to help buyers and sellers of out-of-home use smarter data, do it with better data. We often hear this said, but do you personally believe that better measurement will result in increasing the spend in the channel?
Yes, I mean, it's two things. It's protecting existing spend, because metrics in other channels are improving all the time. And if we don't keep up, then we fall behind. And it is, yeah, it's increasing spend as well, because it allows advertisers to understand what they really want, which is people to see the ad. I mean, we're passionate about how many square feet it is, how many pixels it's got, all this kind of stuff, resolution, visibility distance, all the kind of thing. All they want to know is they're going to sell cars or they're going to sell soap powder. And so they need to know that they're reaching the kind of people that are going to buy a car or the kind of people that are going to buy soap powder. And that's where measurement comes in. It allows advertisers to buy what they actually want, which is selling their product. And it's also critical for developing other things as an ingredient, as it were. You can't do ROI modeling without knowing who's seen the ad. You can't do cross-media measurement without having the kind of metrics that we deliver in out of home. And what we see also now is that most of the kind of developed out of home currencies do visibility adjustment. And what we're seeing that kind of technique now being applied to online and to other media. And we're ahead of the game, and we should stay that way.
So we're going to jump into some of the work you've done on audience measurement in a minute, but you just brought up a point that I think has been really hot in the news, specifically in other channels, and is certainly hot here in the United States, which is a movement towards measuring the value of a media by using attention metrics. So you're saying out of home is ahead of the curve in measuring itself using attention metrics versus other channels?
Yeah, in most developed currencies, yes, we use visibility adjustment because we've always had the kind of, I guess, the buyers or the clients saying, well, do people actually look at posters? We can measure how many people go past the poster, but do people actually look at it? Generally, if you're watching a TV program, you're watching it, even if you're maybe cooking also. And where media has editorial content, then people are drawn to that media by that content, and then advertising interrupts it. We don't have that content. So we need to demonstrate of the people that go past, how many people have seen it. So we've always, I mean, for over a quarter of a century now, been using, in various parts of the world, visibility work, eye cameras, all kinds of different techniques, to understand who actually sees the poster, sees the ad. Attention metrics takes that slightly further, and there's a lot of creative elements in there that you've got to bear in mind. Different advertiser categories have different levels of attention, but it's finance is always a bit tricky unless someone's in market. The moment someone's in market, they start spotting ads for that product. But all we can do is say how many people have put their eyes on it and therefore can see the ad.
Got it. So just going back to what I mentioned, you have just done an extensive amount of work curating global out-of-home audience measurement guidelines for the World Out-of-Home Organization. I know Neil Edelston was very involved in that work. Neil Edelston, formerly of JCDecaux, also maybe competing with Gideon for the smartest global out-of-home meashment person I've met.
I'll give him that one for the moment.
Okay, so you can be number two, but you also did a lot of work with the JICs, JICs, the global JICs. And before we kind of talk about what the work is that you did, since you worked so much with Root, and it's such a foreign concept to us in the United States, what is a JIC, and globally, what do they look like for the channel? Okay, so
a JIC is a joint industry currency. Formerly, you use the word for a joint industry committee, but yeah, joint industry currency. And that is exactly what it says on the tin. It's across the industry. It's a currency that's believed and used and trusted by everybody across the industry. So the main features of a JIC is probably its governance. On its board and also on its technical committee, it has representatives from sellers, clearly, buyers who are experts in the specialism, but really importantly, advertisers, clients, such that when they produce metrics, or it becomes currency. And the real difference between metrics and currencies is trust. I can give you a piece of paper with some green ink on it, but if it's printed by the right people and it's got the $ on it, then you'll trust it a lot more than something I'm going to print with my own face on. So when people are involved in the development of these metrics, they trust it, and then they use it, and then it becomes currency, and then it becomes valuable. So that's really what it's for.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think, in the United States, we're very used to companies like Nielsen and ComScore, which are privately owned companies, putting out currency metrics, but globally, there are a number of these organizations. Yeah. So in your work, you worked with them. Like, where are they? Who are they?
Okay, we worked with 11. There are many more, but we worked with 11 initially, because there's a little bit of a European bias in the JICs that are out there. So we, it's all actually, if you get the book, actually, I'll show you that in a moment. So we did Belgium, Germany, Sweden, UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, US, Japan, and I'm like really embarrassed about the 11th one. That's terrible. That's terrible. Switzerland.
And Switzerland. So I know they were very, very generous with their time in helping to curate this doc. What was the origin of the project? Like, why did this come to be?
Okay, well, it was sponsored by the World Out of Home Organization, and the kind of the genesis of the World, or WOO, is collaboration. It's a non-profit. It's got very few actual paid staff, but it's got huge numbers of members. Its board comprises of people from all over the world, very senior out-of-home practitioners from around the world, and they give their time to try and help the industry globally. And so this is a real collaboration project. We have these 11 companies, organizations, all giving their time, each of them giving me interviews, talking for hours, submitting documents, really put their back into it, for no real gain for themselves, just to promote better measurement across the world. Okay, everyone gets to read what other people do because there are different ways of kind of approaching the same challenges. But yeah, so during the pandemic, when the pandemic was stopping us doing a lot of other work, World Out of Home Organization was looking for things that needed doing. The ESIMA guidelines, which are fantastic and still relevant, and I recommend you read them if you're interested in that kind of thing, were printed in 2009. Since then, we've had automated trading, the explosion of digital, the requirement for cross-media measurement. The medium's moved on, and we needed to update that. And so our approach was to, rather than have a totally technical document, although the first half of it is to look at best practice from around the world being done by the best practitioners. And they're not exclusively just those 11. There is some fantastic new work coming out of France, using synthetic audiences, which hasn't been published yet, so we couldn't include it yet. The document will continue to be updated, because there'll always be something new, because other media are developing and we need to keep moving to stay on top of it.
So is it more than about best practices versus out of home being measured using an apples to apples approach across borders? Like, is it important that we're measuring out of home the same way from country to country, or is this more about best practices?
It's about best practice. It is important that people can compare metrics across territories, but the number of advertisers that actually buy cross territory is quite small. It's far more important that you measure what you can well. So depending on the territory, depending on the data that's available within that territory, depending on the funding that's available within that territory, you've got to do the best job. But you've got the same challenges wherever you are. It's just different approaches to surmount those challenges. So what I found fascinating with this, and hopefully people who read it will also, is that people have got different ways of going about this, but they've all got the same fundamental kind of main building blocks that they need to cover. And they cover them differently, but it does mean that if you are one of those few advertisers that is buying pan-national, you can look at two territories with slightly different methodologies, but essentially coming up with the same overall approach, and make comparisons that way. You can also, because JICs are transparent, They publish how they do it. There's no black box. You can also look into it and say, okay, this is how they differ slightly. And I will, in my ROI modeling, I'm going to change the metric here because it is being produced very slightly differently. And it's that transparency which makes the currency so much more valuable as well to advertisers.
Got it. Got it. That's great. So the document stands at 96 pages when I last checked, which may be a little bit bulky for some non-practitioners. Can you give us like the global out-of-home audience measurement guidelines for dummies overview?
The 101. Okay, two things. One, have a look at the document. The first section of it is quite digestible and gives you quite a good summary there. But essentially, there are, as I say, there are these common challenges across the world, across any territory. And this gives us techniques or shows techniques that are used to address those challenges. So challenge one is how many people? How many people are there? You know, we have quite a lot of government data here in the UK, and it makes that challenge a bit easier. In other countries, that's really difficult to get hold of. But how many people? Ticket gate data, that kind of thing. You know how many people. You don't know who, you don't know how often, but you know how many. So how many people? You then need to know where do they go? And more importantly, where they come from, because where they come from is quite a good indication of who they are. And that requires a travel survey, which can be research-based in some cases. It can be device-based in others. And again, there are different approaches to reaching that. Who they are, really important. Now, again, that can be done with research. That can be imputed from their other behaviors. It can be imputed from where they live. But who they are is really important for advertisers because, you know, a car manufacturer wants to sell to the kind of people that are going to buy a new car, you know, whereas a soap manufacturer is probably looking at slightly different audiences. And then critically, did they see it? Being near an ad, it's like having an ad that appears below the fold on a web page. Just because the ad's been served to you doesn't mean you've seen it. And so did they see the ad is critical. In my view, and that again, virtually all the JICs do that to some extent. Well, to a great extent, all of them do it to some extent, because that's the first thing that advertisers trim down on. You give them a gross number, and they will apply their own discount to it, and that way.
Yeah, not to mention that it doesn't reflect well in models when you're trying to identify the lift, if you're including metrics that are overcounting how many people saw it to begin with. Yeah.
It makes us, there's an argument on a CPM basis, but in reality, it's cost per result that people are after. CPM is just one metric along the way in finding out how much it costs me to sell my product.
So you mentioned earlier that you have worked in out-of-home for a long time, and you've worked in data in out-of-home for a long time. Thinking back over your 60-year career, I'm just teasing, is there a time that you can think of where you saw like a really innovative use of data and insights, or something that really broke the mold or really drove impact for a client?
Yeah, loads. I mean, it's out-of-home. We're brilliant at this stuff.
It's been 60 years. I've seen 60.
Yeah, and I remember when Caxton was out there printing his first Bible. Yeah, no, tons. We're always innovating. The thing about being a challenger industry is that people are inherent salespeople. We're always looking for a new angle. We're always looking for a new story. And data is part of that. I can give you a couple of examples depending on timing. There's one we did many years ago, and this is using client first-party data. So this is a flag carrier airline in the UK, so a major airline, with a very well-used app. So their app penetration is fantastic. And their app penetration gives really good locational data on their existing customers. Their existing customers, they know their flight habits, they know long-haul flyers. So we've got that. So we've got movement data on long-haul flyers that use this airline. We've also got currency, which gives us how many people in general are in front of these screens. And we bought screens across the UK that mirrored their travel behavior on the railways, because that's when people can actually then start accessing their app. So at 6:30 in the morning, these people are getting on the trains and they're heading towards the major termini in the major cities. By 8:30 in the morning, they've left, they're done. The main audience driver in rail is between 8:30 and 9:30. It's the most expensive hour to buy. We were buying cheaper hours. We were buying domination of every single screen in the station. You might be able to hear a dog in the background. Yeah, okay.
Okay, dogs are allowed on this podcast.
Yeah, no. She was very excited by this campaign at the time as well. So every single screen in the station, as they passed through it, lit up with this brand, and then disappeared afterwards. So we were buying really quite effectively a programmatic type buy, a very small amount of actual space, and therefore we're charged not a lot. And
a very
massive,
targeted day part out of home campaign.
and that's client first data. So I mean, yes, currency is essential to price everything and to do most planning. But when you have a client that trusts you and can share their first party data, you can do amazing things. And another example, I guess, a retailer, which is like DIY and garden stuff. And I mean, all their trades, Friday to Sunday. And what we do there is we use their stock levels and weather. So people are making decisions about what they're doing that weekend, kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We went live Wednesday through Sunday. And based on what the weather was going to be that weekend, you change the product, but you only show products that are in stock locally. And then you obviously give a kind of call to action as to where the local store is. And that allows, even during the weekend, you have a good weather day in the UK, which we have every now and then, and all the kind of garden furniture sells out, you move on to hedge trimmers, or whatever it is. If it's going to be a lousy weekend, which is pretty normal for us, then it's kind of electric drills. And
I love that, like data-driven dynamic creative is really hot, and I'd love to see more of that being done.
It's I mean, coming back to attention and effectiveness, relevant advertising, stuff that speaks to you, just sells better. It's the same screen, it's the same cost of media, but it just resonates so much better with the audience if you talk to them about something they are actually interested in at the time. But I'm not creative, I'm a dev.
So speaking frankly, Gideon, if you had one message that you could broadcast to the whole world, what would it be?
Measure what you can measure accurately.
I'm sure the whole world will lean into that message.
Yeah,
if people want to get access to the global out-of-home audience measurement guidelines, where should they go, Gideon?
Okay, start with the World Out-of-Home Organization website. It's currently on the landing page under the news, kind of recent news. If you're coming to this a little later, just go to the news section and you'll see where we are.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts, your expertise, and your funny comments with us today, Gideon. And thank you to everyone who listened. Join us next time for more Frank Talk with Kim Frank on Speaking Frankly.